Welcome to the Catholic Couch, the official audio podcast of the Catholic Counseling Institute. I'm Amber Pilkington, Catholic therapist, wife, and mother. Around here, we talk about real issues with real faith, blending the wisdom of the Catholic Church with the best of psychology, so you can find clarity, peace, and purpose in your relationships, your vocation, and everyday life. Whether you're folding laundry or driving the carpool, pull up a seat and let's go. I'm so excited to see how this format works. I'm Amber Pilkington, Catholic therapist, wife, mom, and woman who used to think being easy to love meant never needing anything. Today, we're starting a new series that I truly believe is going to hit home for a lot of you. It's the topic I get asked about more than almost anything else. It's one of those quiet questions that people don't always say out loud, but they feel it deeply. Is it okay that I feel stretched thin in my marriage? Is it selfish to ask for help? Does setting a boundary mean I'm giving up? If you've wondered things like that, or if you've ever felt like you're giving and giving until there's nothing left, you are not alone, and you're not doing marriage wrong. You might just need some new language. That's what this series is here for. It's called Sacred Space, Catholic Boundaries in Marriage. And before we go any further, yes, I know the word boundaries might feel a little clinical, or like something you read about in a psychology article and not a theology book. But stay with me. Because boundaries, when done well, aren't about coldness or walls or ultimatums. They're about creating the kind of space where love can actually breathe. They help you stay close without losing yourself. They're not a rejection of your spouse. They're a way of saying, I believe this love is worth doing well. I believe we can grow. Here's the roadmap of what we'll be covering in the next 5 episodes. Episode 1, today, we're going to start by exploring what boundaries really are and what they're not. We'll look at where invisible pain builds up in marriage and how noticing that pain is actually the beginning of healing. Episode 2, we'll look at emotional labor, why one partner often ends up carrying the mental and emotional weight of the household, and how that imbalance can be addressed with honesty and love. Episode 3, we'll explore how personality, trauma, and upbringing shape how we each approach boundaries, especially when one spouse avoids conflict and the other leans into it. Episode 4, we'll talk about how to hold a boundary when it's met with anger or resistance, and what to do when setting a boundary leads to conflict. And finally, in episode 5, we'll end with hope, which, by the way, is my confirmation name, how boundaries actually strengthen intimacy, foster reconnection, and support a Catholic understanding of reconciliation and mutual sanctification. So we're not starting with submission or confrontation or anything too overwhelming. We're starting with you, with what's real, with what hurts, with what's gone unspoken. Now, because stories stick better than sermons, I'm going to introduce you to 3 fictional couples that we'll be following throughout this series. I'll be weaving in and out of their lives to help us ground these concepts in real-world situations. Emily and Josh, married 5 years, 2 small kids, and stuck in a silent tug-of-war over who's doing what. Emily's exhausted, Josh thinks everything's fine, and no one's saying what they really need. Teresa and Mike, married 22 years. They're the couple everyone at church thinks is perfect. They serve, they smile, they show up. But they haven't had an honest emotional conversation in nearly a decade. There's a slow drift happening, and neither of them knows how to name it. Carmen and Leo, newly married, navigating very different upbringings. She's conflict avoidant, he's passionate and expressive, and their communication styles keep crashing into each other. They're trying to build a future, but keep stumbling over childhood wiring they didn't even know was there. These couples are fictional, but the dynamics are very real. You'll probably recognize yourself or someone you love in bits and pieces of each one. So let me ask you something. When's the last time you said, I'm not okay out loud? Or told your spouse, I need help, without apologizing right afterward? Most of us were raised with a lot of beautiful ideas about sacrifice, self-giving, and patience, and those are good things. But somewhere along the way, many of us got the message that having needs made us weak, that asking for space made us selfish, that saying no was a moral failing. And I want to say gently, clearly, with every ounce of compassion I can, none of that is true. Boundaries are not about being less loving. They're about making love last. They're how we say, I want to stay connected to you, and I can't do that well if I'm constantly running on empty. So today's episode, we're not making any big changes or confrontations yet. We're just noticing. We're starting to ask, where does it feel like something's not working? And maybe even, where have I stopped telling the truth, out loud or to myself, because I thought it wasn't allowed? That's where we're headed today. Take a deep breath, settle in. We're going to look at what boundaries actually are, what they aren't, and why the absence of them can create the kind of pain we don't always have words for, but we definitely carry. All right, so let's define it. When we talk about boundaries, what do we really mean? I'll tell you what most people think we mean. Walls, coldness, ultimatums. Something you do when you've had enough and you're ready to storm off. But that's not what boundaries are, not healthy ones anyway. A boundary is just a clear recognition of what belongs to you, your time, your energy, your values, your body, your emotions, and a way to communicate how those things can be treated with care in relationship. It's like a front yard with a fence. You're not building a moat. You're not putting up barbed wire. You're saying, this is my space. I want you here, but I need you to come through the gate, not just barrel in. Boundaries aren't barriers. They're actually the structure that protects closeness. Let me say that again. Healthy boundaries protect closeness because you can't feel safe opening up to someone if you also feel like your needs won't be respected or that saying no will cost you love. Now, sometimes when I'm talking with Catholic couples, someone will say, but shouldn't I be self-giving? Isn't love about sacrifice? Yes, and love without freedom isn't love, it's pressure. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1731, we hear, freedom is the power rooted in reason and will to act or not to act, so as to perform deliberate actions on one's own responsibility. Marriage isn't a loss of personhood. It's a union of two whole people learning how to love freely, generously, and with responsibility. If one person starts to disappear, that's not unity. That's fusion. And fusion almost always leads to burnout or resentment. Let's go back to our first couple, Emily and Josh. So Emily is the default parent, the emotional planner, the chore coordinator, the meal prepper, the baby rocker, and the appointment maker. Josh, good guy. Funny, kind, loyal, but kind of oblivious. He thinks if she needed help, she'd ask. But she doesn't ask because she's afraid of sounding critical, because she tells herself he works hard too. I should be able to manage. Because she heard on a podcast once that if you ask your husband more than once, he will start thinking you are a nag. She's still not sure if that podcast was written by a psychologist with degrees in training, a coach who is charismatic but got their letters in a weekend, or a woman who appears happy but is dying inside. So what happens? Weeks go by, then months. Then one day, boom. She blows up over a spoon left in the sink, but it's not about the spoon. It's never about the spoon. It's about carrying everything alone and feeling like nobody noticed. What Emily needed all along was permission. Permission to say, I can't do all of this without help. It's not because I'm weak. It's because I'm a person. And a boundary for her might be as simple as, I'm not going to stay up doing all the chores alone anymore. I need us to divide this. Josh didn't need a lecture. He needed information. He needed a window into her world that she had been quietly shutting. Boundaries are how we open the window kindly, clearly, and say, this is what love looks like for me right now. Can you meet me here? Now, maybe some of you are still sitting with that tension. You might be thinking, but shouldn't I die to myself? Yes, but not disappear. Even St. Paul in Ephesians 5, that big scripture people love to quote about submission, says this before anything else. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Mutual, reciprocal, out of reverence, that's the context. Boundaries aren't about control, they're about communion. They're how we say, here's who I am, and I'm inviting you to respond with care. No manipulation, no power struggle, just clarity. So let's sit with this for a minute. Most of the pain that comes from a lack of boundaries isn't malicious. It's not always about someone trying to control or dominate or take advantage of you. A lot of times, it's quiet, accidental, cultural. It's the mom who never taught you to say, I need rest, because she never said it herself. It's the youth group talk that praised generosity, but never talked about limits. It's the guilt that whispers, you should be able to do more. It's the little part of you that believes saying no equals disappointing God. Or what sometimes feels worse, disappointing everyone else. But here's the truth. Lack of boundaries slowly erodes connection. Not just connection with your spouse, but connection with yourself, with your kids, with your own body, even with God. Because when your life becomes a series of quiet yeses that you didn't really mean, you're not being honest. And love, real love, requires truth. Let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Matthew 5:37. That's Jesus, not a boundary manual, Jesus. Boundaries are part of telling the truth. Now let's get a little nerdy for a second, but stay with me. I promise I'll make it quick and clear. Clinical psychologist Dr. Henry Cloud, who co-authored the classic book Boundaries, defines a boundary as a personal property line that marks those things for which we are responsible. That includes our thoughts, our feelings, our choices, our limits, our time, our energy. Boundaries say, this is me. This is what I'm responsible for. That over there, that's not mine. Research backs this up. People who struggle with poor boundaries are more likely to experience burnout, compassion fatigue, increased anxiety, and depression. Codependent dynamics in marriage and family systems. In other words, boundaries aren't just a trendy self-help idea. They're emotionally and psychologically life-giving. And just like brushing your teeth doesn't mean you're selfish, saying, I can't keep doing this alone doesn't mean you're self-centered. It means you're trying to live in integrity with your values, with your body, and with your vocation. But what about dying to self? Okay, let's go there. There's a fear I hear all the time when I talk to Catholic women about boundaries, and it sounds like this. But aren't we supposed to die to ourselves? Yes, that is central to Christian love. But dying to self is not the same as erasing yourself. You cannot be gift of self without first being a self. You can't pour from an empty glass. You can't give what you don't have. You can't dispossess until you possess. However you want to think about it. The gospel message about gift of self presumes a proper love, possession, knowing of self. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus didn't come to make us less human. He came to make us more fully human. He didn't ignore his own needs. We read in the Gospels that he rested, he withdrew, he asked for help. He wept, he got hungry, he said no. He even walked away when people demanded more from him than he was called to give in that moment. See Mark 1:35. Dying to self means releasing ego, pride, and control, a disordered love of self at the expense of another's true good, not just their preference or comfort in the moment. Not your voice, not your needs, not your God-given dignity. Our needs make demands on the people we are in relationship with, which gives them the opportunity to grow virtue. Don't deny them of the gift of learning to love you more rightly. Catechism paragraph 1782 says, man has the right to act in conscience and in freedom so as personally to make moral decisions. That means boundaries discerned with prayer and conscience are not a betrayal of holiness. They're part of it. Now let's check back in with Teresa and Mike. Teresa's a quiet doer. She volunteers at the parish, cooks meals for new moms, takes care of her aging parents, never complains, and has somehow absorbed the idea that if she does anything for herself, it's selfish. And you cannot be fully loved if you are not fully known, which includes your needs. Mike doesn't abuse this. He loves her, but he's gotten used to her silence. And over time, the silence has grown. First, they stopped sharing their daily lives. Then they stopped touching. Then they stopped laughing. Now they're kind of roommates, good ones, faithful ones, but lonely, married in name only. When Teresa finally starts to name her exhaustion, when she says, I don't feel known anymore, it's not an accusation, it's a plea. And it begins a turning point. Mike realizes he's taken her for granted. He starts asking questions again. Teresa starts saying what she wants without apologizing for it. They didn't need a total life overhaul. They needed permission to show up honestly again. And boundaries, naming needs, time, space, desires, that's what brought their marriage back to life. Boundaries versus control. Let's wrap this episode with a few important distinctions. Boundaries are not control. They're not about manipulating someone else's behavior. They're about telling the truth about your own limits and letting others respond how they will. They are also not about telling other people what they can and cannot do. Saying, you are not allowed to speak to me that way is actually not a boundary. A boundary is, if you speak to me that way, I will walk out of the room. Boundaries are always enforceable because they only involve you telling what you will or won't do. When people say that other people don't respect my boundaries, I always wonder what they believe a boundary is. When other people don't change in light of our boundary is not proof they don't respect our boundary. It's usually proof they don't respect themselves. Also, someone not being happy about your boundary is not the same thing as them not respecting it. Other people are allowed to have feelings too. Sometimes the only person cheering you on when you set a boundary is your therapist, because boundaries are often pattern disruptors, and people like patterns to stay the same. So be patient with others too. Boundaries are not punishment. They're not silent treatments or angry shutdowns. They're honest expressions of your values and needs, saying, if you don't do this thing I want you to do, then I will hurt myself is a threat. It is not a boundary. That may sound extreme, but I've seen it. Boundaries are not conditional love. They are how we love within our real capacity, not beyond it in a way that creates resentment. And you are allowed to have capacity. You are allowed to be a person, not just a role. Gentle invitation, a little homework. Before we close today, I want to offer you a tiny little invitation. No big action step yet, just this. Find one moment this week where you feel resentment creeping in. Then pause. Ask yourself, what am I saying yes to that maybe isn't mine? What am I afraid would happen if I said no? What would love with truth look like in this moment? No judgment, no perfection, just awareness. Next time, we're talking about emotional labor, the invisible load many women carry, and how to start naming and sharing it without shame or guilt. Until then, be gentle with yourself. Your needs are not a burden. Your voice is not a threat. You are a daughter of God, and boundaries, they're one of the ways he protects his daughters. Next time, we're going deeper into the silent load so many Catholic wives carry, the emotional labor of the home, why it's invisible, why it matters, and how to talk about it in a way that your spouse doesn't tune out. And yes, we'll bring Emily and Josh back, and Teresa and Mike, and Carmen and Leo. You're going to love them. Until then, take care of your heart, name what's real, and remember, boundaries are not a rejection of love. They are the shape that helps it last. And as always, there will always be a place for you on the Catholic couch.